e o avanço adequados do ecossistema. Esta combinação aborda preocupações ambientais, questões de produção de segurança alimentar e a cadeia de abastecimento alimentar. Convidamos ao palco Richard Scoy.
Good. Federico, welcome.
Obrigado. Eu vim acompanhar o professor Richard. Meu nome é Federico Falland. Eu trabalhei com ele nos Emirados, conheço bastante do trabalho dele e eu estou aqui mais do que nada para apoiá-lo quando precisar estender um pouco ou explicar alguma coisa durante alguma pergunta ou algum conceito. Desejo a todos uma boa palestra.
I've been very excited about coming here until I saw all the university students in the back. And then my stomach started feeling like I had buzzards inside. I got very nervous. Anyway, my name is Richard Esco. I've worked in agriculture as a hobby for the last 38 years in organic farming. I was a professor at the University of Denver as an adjunct professor, and then I went to Albania and was a professor there for a while as an adjunct, and then I became a professor in the United Arab Emirates. I was in the business faculty, and what got me into agriculture in a personal way was one of the teachers had to leave the UAE. And during that time, they didn't have someone to take their place. Sorry, here? Cannot hear? They cannot hear the translation. So let me know when you can hear it. It's good. It's good. So in the UAE, one of the teachers did not have, they had to leave, and no one was there to take their place. And I told them that I would run the course because I had enough graduate hours to run the course. And so anyway, I ended up working in soil science, and everyone said, you can't grow food here in the UAE. It's too hot. The temperature is in Celsius up to 55 degrees Celsius. And the rainfall is around 70 millimeters per year. The soil is sandy, and the water is very salty. So it's the worst case scenario for anyone to do agriculture. And they said, you can't do it, so I said, I want the job. I love a challenge. I absolutely love a challenge, and this is probably one of the biggest challenges I've ever had. But in the beginning, they said the tomato plants only grow about 18 inches. That would be, how many? About 25? No, more. 45? Yeah, just say 45 centimeters tall. And when we grew our tomato at the school, it was over 8 feet tall. And with that, some people started talking to the sheikh, one of the sheikhs, and they tried to hire me. And for 3 years, I didn't want to work for the sheikh. So finally, I decided to work for the sheikh, and they put us over a project to build an ecosystem, agricultural system that did not use electricity, that used a small amount of water, and we produced exceptional results the first year. So I'll show you a little bit of that today. Let's go here. So one of the things I want to talk to you about a little bit is the Burj Khalifa. It's not a plant, it's a building. So you think, why is he talking about architecture when we're talking about agriculture? The main thing that was interesting, I was in the Emirates for 9 years, and I had many visitors to come visit. And I would always take them to the Burj Khalifa because it's the tallest building in the world. Everyone had wanted to see it. Not one time did anyone ever ask me to show them the foundation of the Burj. Everybody was interested in seeing the magnificent building. But what they didn't realize was that magnificent building would not be there if they hadn't spent over 3 times longer working on the foundation. The foundation is the most important aspect of anything that you do, whether it's a personal thing, or whether it's a business idea, or whether it's agriculture, or building a building. If you don't have a strong foundation, your system will fall. Now, we've been in working with agriculture for a number of years now, with synthetic chemicals for over 100 years. It's built on a faulty foundation, and that's why the inputs are having to increase and the outputs, the production is decreasing substantially. So it's gotten to a tipping point where we either have to change or we're going to have to starve to death. And so today we're going to talk about change. So one of the things that I'm interested in is the local communities. Sustainability begins locally. You have to take care of yourself first, or your family, or your local community, before you can go and export. If you don't have enough to eat yourself, you're not going to be strong enough to grow enough food to sell to other people. So local communities, from the standpoint of sustainability, should be your number one objective. After that, you start looking at exporting into outer communities. So when we're working with agriculture, you're working with community, there's 7 particular pillars that you should always look at. Now, again, this has nothing specifically to do with agriculture, but all 7 areas our agricultural thought processes tie through all 7 areas. The first area is education. Without education in this area, we'll fail. Financial and monetary systems, you have to have financial support. Spiritual, you have to have a belief system in what you're doing. Now, from my perspective, I grew up in a religious family. I wouldn't say I'm a religious person. My family is very, very religious. However, I do study Scripture. Whether I'm a religious person or not a religious person, I know the principles found in Scripture, in the Bible, work, period. I've tested them. They always work. They will always work. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk to you about today will have a spiritual context, a biblical context, and I'll show you some of where that comes from. Not a lot, but a little bit I'll show you. Research and development. I understand Brazil is one of the biggest and best in the world when it comes to research and development as it relates to agriculture. And some of the people that I've talked to in the last 2 days since I've been here are way beyond me. So you've asked me to come speak to you, and you've got people in the audience, there's one right there, who knows a tremendous amount more than I do on a very specific, narrow field. So what we have to do is, not only do we have to have people that know very, very specific things in detail, but we also have to have people that know a little bit about a lot of things and can pull these things together. So research and development is a very important aspect. Commerce, you have to be able to sell your goods. You have to be able to move the goods. You have to be able to produce the goods. That's commerce. Without commerce, the monetary system doesn't work. Then we have governance. This is not government. I'm talking about governance, a standard. Whether it's an outside group that's creating the standard for you or yourself, you create your own standards. You have to have standards. My standards are always moving higher and higher and higher. That's my lifestyle. I like to push the limits to create higher and higher standards. Some people don't like that. The last part is health and social services. We have a group in my home in Georgia and South Carolina, and a lot of what we do in agriculture, we make money, we make good money, but we donate that money to different groups. Some groups deal with women in crisis. One of the groups deals with people who are suicidal. But those are issues that are not just physical health, but they're health related. And that's something that we do with our funds. By the way, this comes from 2 places. One is the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible, where it talks about the 7 cities. I love archaeology. I love it with a passion. Since I was a little boy, I would go with different people to study archaeology all over the world. It was wonderful. But what I found was when I was looking at the 7 cities of Asia Minor, is each one had a focal point. One was education. Back on that. One city was education. Another was finance. Another was spiritual. All 7 cities had a main focal point. Now you look at the other parts from Levitical law. All the law can be categorized into 7 areas. These are the 7 areas. So I want to just share with you where I got some of the concepts. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, just a little bit where you understand my mindset. So we have to live by principles. A principle is a fundamental truth. It's a proposition that serves to help us make decisions. It's a guideline. It helps us think through our chain of reasoning. So the question I have for you is, what principles should you live by? There's all kinds of principles that you can choose. Which ones are most important to you? These are the 7 areas that I live by. These are the 5 areas, the 5 principles that I live by. 1, God is the creator. He owns everything. I own nothing. When I was born, I had nothing. When I die, I'll have nothing. God can take away my house. He can take away my land. He can take away my mind, my health. It belongs to Him. When I start believing this, it helps me not to worry about things too much, because I'm not in control. I'm not in control of the weather. So why worry about it? I can plan for it, but I can't worry about it. The second principle is man, however, has been given stewardship of the things on earth. We're given stewardship for government, society, ideas, our family, our health. We manage the things that God has placed in our care. Number 3, to become a good steward, we must study and train. Guys in the back, listen to this. You've got to study the rest of your life and train yourself to be the best steward that you can possibly be. So study your field, become an expert in your field. But don't just limit yourself to one field. Learn many things, because you can take some things from one area and apply it to another. Only God the Creator can bring to an end the things that He's established, and only God the Creator can choose to create upon the things that He's destroyed. These are the 5 principles that I live my life by. Now today we're going to talk about principle number 3, becoming a good steward. I'll let you read through that in Portuguese real quick. Is it okay? We're okay? Thumbs up? Okay. All right. These are the sustainable principles that I work with when it comes to farming, sustainable farming. And now we're going to start getting more into the farming. As we talk, we're going to have a lot of overview, and then we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper in specific subjects. But all I'm doing is introducing to you today concepts. And each one of these concepts you can go into detail and study to become very proficient in what you do. So number one principle, caring for or serving the needs of the soil. Now this is unlike anything that has been taught in the last 100 years. Everyone says we have to care for the plant. The focus has been on the plant. In organic and sustainable regenerative farming, we focus on the microbial life, on the soil. Now the microbial life in the soil is only about 0.5% of the organic material. So it's a very small portion, but it's a very important portion. We also have to look at the mineralization. I know one of the questions earlier today to the panel dealt with the minerals and the rocks and spending your time in you know, taking those stones, the rock phosphate and the granite dust and various other calcium, and applying that to your field. And he said, is that going to work? The answer is yes and no. More no than yes. If you don't focus on your microbial life, the stone and the rock dust is going to always stay stone and rock dust. It's the microbial life is your focal point. And there's ways of which we will want to care for the microbial life. Principle number 2, plants, disease, insects, they're all indicators of what is lacking, what is in excess, what's not balanced, or what is balanced. These things communicate to you if only you listen. You have to know their language. What's the plant's language? And I'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. There's a symbiotic, this is principle 3, there's a symbiotic relationship between soil life, plant life, and human life. If you don't understand that, this is very important to grasp when we start getting a little deeper in what we're going to talk about. Healthy plants are medicine for the soil, and healthy plants are medicine for us. Number 5, everything that we need to know is found in nature. I'm not telling you. I'll give you just a second to look at these. Okay. All right, so this is what the regenerative farmers say are their principles. Now, with the definition that I just gave you of a principle, this is not a principle. These are methods. So I changed the name on it, 6 core methods for regenerative farming. This is only one subsegment that you need to look at. One thing is understanding the context. Now, we listened to the ex-minister of agriculture earlier today, and he was talking about the context from which they decided to use and build the agricultural system that you're operating in today. Without understanding the history of the context, without understanding the context of your area, you cannot make good decisions. It's impossible to make good decisions without a contextual framework. The next one is minimize disturbance. Now, again, this is not a principle, this is an action. Now, it has consequences. Each one of these has consequences, but these are not principles. Maximize diversity. Very important to maximize the diversity in not only with the microbial life, but your plant life. Cover crop. You want to cover your soils. Never leave your soils uncovered, whether it's through mulch or a living mulch or a dead mulch. Always keep it. It helps the microbial life to grow. It helps to prevent erosion. There's many, many benefits to this. Maintaining live roots. You want to make sure that the roots are continuing to grow because it's creating carbon. Everyone's interested in having carbon. Carbon, carbon. You hear it all the time. Carbon this, carbon that, carbon this. We've got carbon, okay? The problem is we don't know how to hold the carbon in the soil. We don't know how to build the carbon. There's methods of building your carbon, and without the carbon, you are not going to be able to have good structure in your plant. So it is important. And the last one is integrate the livestock. And I'm not one, that's not my expertise. I do have some cattle, and I have a few head of cattle and chickens, but that's not my expertise. When we worked together, this was Federico's expertise. He had the division that handled the animal husbandry piece. And if you have any questions concerning animal husbandry, that's the man right there to see. He did an excellent job in the Emirates. Raising cattle and sheep and goat in the desert is not an easy task. So he's a man to know. All right, this is a model that I developed in grad school, and I applied it as a professor. Now, this deals with contextual framework as well. Can't really see it very well. This, it didn't copy over very well, so there's missing pieces. I think what we're going to do, just to let you know, if any of you guys want copies of the presentation, we'll be glad to give them to you. We'll arrange for you to be able to get copies of it, and that will have the completed slide, but this one is missing some elements. We'll just go on from here on this one. The concept behind the chart that I just showed you, it's teaching people how to think, not what to think. The university systems teaches you what to think now. You go and you open a book and it says think this and think this and think this and think this. They're not teaching students anymore how to think, the process of thinking, analytical thinking, evaluative thinking. We've got to move back into that mold. When I was young, my parents taught me how to think, how to look at gather data and analyze the data, and then take that data and tear it apart, and then synthesize it, put it back together, and create options. No one is taught that anymore. Then you evaluate the options. Then when you find the best option, then you implement it. And then that's a circular thing. It goes on and on and on and on. So these things are very important. So we must create methods through a new lens as it relates to agriculture. Principle-based regenerative farming is principle-based biological regenerative farming. People have the regenerative farming part down, but their emphasis is still not on biology. And again, the emphasis must be on biology, and I'll tell you why. There's a story of Adam and Eve. Everybody knows it. We all know. Adam ate what? What did Adam eat? They picked it, he ate it. In Portuguese, what did Adam eat? Yes, actually, apples. He ate a fruit. And the fruit, that was a moral thing. So, God said, don't eat from the tree. They ate from the tree. Next thing God told Adam, study the characteristics and name my creation. He says, name the animals. To name means the characteristics of. The characteristics of. So you have to name or know the characteristics to understand what it is. It said to reproduce after your kind. Now, I'm real good at that. I've got 5 kids. And there's a lot of beautiful women in Brazil. And I'm not married anymore, so if we want to. So, we'll see. Anyway, I like the reproduction part. But it's reproduction of everything. It's reproduction of animals, reproduction of vegetables and fruit. It's reproduce after your kind. Now, there's one more thing that God told Adam. And this is something that most people don't get. They run right over it. It's essential because it's the only thing that God said, out of everything God could have told him to do for his work, what did God tell him to do? This is the only thing. Any guesses? You know English. Here's it. To till the soil. To till the soil. That's the only job that God gave man. The rest of it we've made up ourselves. But God commanded Adam to till the soil. But what does soil mean? Tilling does not mean rototilling. That's not the word. The Hebrew word of till means to serve, to care for. So our job as humans is to care for the soil, to serve the soil as a servant would. Now I'm going to tie all this together. I know I'm kind of a little bit scattered and I think people are starting to yawn. I am going to tie it together and you are going to be able to use this and it's going to be very, very beneficial for you. So I want to talk about a story before we go into this, though. I grew up as a little boy learning about a farmer who had a goose. And that farmer was a very poor farmer. And he found the goose, and the goose, when he would feed it and water it, take care of it, the goose would lay a golden egg. And he would take that egg and he would start getting out of debt, which we all would do in the beginning. We got an egg. Let me pay for my bills. I got another egg the next day. Let me pay for that. Thank God we got a egg, golden egg. He's meeting my needs. He got another egg. Every day he got an egg. And then he started getting greedy, very greedy, to the point where he wanted all the eggs at one time. So he took his goose, he cut the goose open, and he opened it to find all the eggs. There were no eggs. There were no golden eggs. The next day he had no more golden eggs. This is something very important as it relates to what we're doing. A goose is required, to keep your goose alive, you're required to take care of your goose. You're required to give it energy, give it food, give it good clean air. Now think about it. If you had one goose, only one goose, and it was producing your whole income, you would care for that goose. You would make sure it had the best air, clean air. You would make sure it had the purest of water. That's your gold. The food, you would feed it the top quality food. Remember, you can't replace the goose. The environment, you would make sure that it had the environment that it was supposed to live in. And then you would give it time. This is where you made a mistake. You would give it time to reproduce every day. Every day. My question, what's your goose? What is your goose? The one that keeps on giving day after day after day. My goose is soil. It gives to me every time I plant. But if I don't take care of that goose, if I don't take care of that soil, it's not going to provide for me anymore. It's very important to understand that concept. You can ruin your soil, you can kill your microbes, and it will not produce for you anymore. It's a simple principle with a very complex application. So what do? How do we care for the soil? We have to give it air. In other words, you don't want compacted soil. If the soil is compacted, the microbes die. You want water. Too much water drowns the microbes. Not enough water kills the microbes. Food. What type of food does your microbe need? What type? It's important for you to start understanding your soil as compared to his soil. You're in a different environment. You may have different needs. You may be in a cold environment or a tropical environment or a desert. Every one of the microbes that live in these bioregions are different. You have to also give time to produce and reproduce. Many people want it quickly. So soil management is our infrastructure, going back to the birds. When we start building our farm, when we start building our soil, we're looking at the infrastructure of our farm. It's the most important aspect of your infrastructure. So, I've heard people talk about food security today several times, and I was hearing the translation, but it's the same as everywhere in the world. For us to have food security, again, we're looking at a local concept, but it is a global issue. When you're working your farm, for it to be sustainable and you to meet the needs of your community, it has to be financially viable. If you can't make money, why do it? Because you got to make money to buy other things to live. It has to be nutritionally healthy. You have to grow it in sufficient quantities. The water and soil have to have efficiencies and effectiveness. Now, we'll talk about that later. You'll understand what I'm saying. Logistics. You have to have logistics to move your products from point A to point B. You have to have knowledge and know-how. And this is where I'm coming in today. We're going to talk about some of the knowledge that you need to start focusing on to learn about. And I'll show you some things that we did and why it worked and how it worked. But you also have to set standards. What are your standards that you will live by? You have to understand those things. And the ability to develop new processes, because some of the things that you currently can get, you may not have access to in the future. Fuel prices are going up, right? In America they did. They've tripled in the last 18 months, fuel prices. Well, that meant fertilizer prices went up too. It's made from the same thing. I want to ask you a question. This is just kind of going off to a tangent. How many of you would pour gasoline in your field? Just, okay, you're going to grow crops there, you're going to pour gasoline on it? Anybody do that, ever? You ever spilt diesel on your soil? Somebody has. I've spilt it. I noticed something. Nothing grows there for a long, long, long time. Fertilizer's made from the same stuff that gasoline's made from. It's a slower process of killing, but it's still, the end result's the same. So these are the issues. This is the contextual frame of the world as well as Brazil. Food demand is increasing, food supply is decreasing. Now, the reason food demand is increasing is twofold. One, the population is growing. Number two, the quality of the food that we're growing is not as nutritious. It's not as nutrient rich. So it takes more food for us to fill up, to feed our body, to get the energy that we're after. If we start focusing on making very high quality food, you don't have to eat as much. So food supply going down, and logistics are crazy now, trying to get things moved from point A to point B in the US, Europe. It's very difficult. Water issues, supply and demand. We have lots of water issues. I know you've got a small amount of rain, they say around 40 inches or so in this region. To me, that's not bad. You can do a lot with 40 inches of rain, and we'll show you some principles there as well, how to do that. Water pollution's bad. On the soil fertility, microbial life, water retention, erosion. Do any of you guys have erosion in your fields? Anybody? Nobody has erosion. 1, 2, 3. I saw a nod. 4. A lot of people are having erosion. Do you know why? Do you have an idea why or how to stop it? We're going to talk about how to stop it in a few minutes. It's not hard to do. So, water retention, very important. We're going to go into how to retain your water. And then the microbial life is essential. Now, the other part deals with the production and the yields. Decreasing production outputs. We're getting less and less food, and we're putting more and more inputs, which is costing us more, and we're receiving less income from it. That is a crime. There's no reason for it. I'm going to show you how not to do that. Increasing weed and insect disease damage. Anybody have weeds? Anybody? Come on, guys, raise your hand. Got some weeds. Okay, my number one thing, I went to Thailand. I'm going to show you some stuff I did in Thailand. We had no weeds in Thailand. Before I went, that was their number one thing. They said our weeds grow this much in a day. They weren't that far off. They grew inches every single day. So that was their number one thing. By the time we finished 3 years later, they had no weeds. We'll show you how to do that. The insects, the weeds, the disease. Anybody have those things? Not just weeds, you've got insects. I'm going to show you why you have insects. And you know you don't have to have pesticides to get rid of your insects. Did y'all know that? Yes? No? Feedback is good. I like feedback. So nod your head. Yes, you knew. You don't have to have insecticides to get rid of, and I'm not talking just chemical, I'm talking about biological insecticides either. Insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, they're not a good thing. And we can do things to prevent the use of it, and it will be more healthy as well. Increasing health issues. How many of you have family who have had cancer or diabetes? Okay, I have cancer, and it comes from the chemicals that I used to work with when I was a young child. My mother died of cancer, my father has cancer, my brother has pancreatic cancer, and I've got skin cancer. We all had to work with chemicals our whole life, so that's what got me into no chemicals. There's no reason for them. Now I know there is no reason for them. All right, so what we're going to focus on today to solve all these issues is the soil fertility. Again, care for your soil. Now, currently, our current situation, if you go and take your fields off of the fertilizer, the synthetic chemical fertilizers, you take them off of your herbicides, you don't use pesticides, okay, right away, you just cut. It's like the soil is a drug addict. You can't necessarily do that with drug addicts because they'll go crazy and almost die. The withdrawals are horrible. It's the same thing with soil. So what is the drug of choice for our soil? Synthetic chemicals. Now I'm going to quote two scriptures, and then we're going to go off of this, and we'll get into more of the nitty-gritty. So these are some of the principles that I use. Jesus said, salt is good, but once salt has lost its savor, it's no longer good for the dunghill. A dunghill is a compost pile. That's all it is. And he said salt is good. Well, he learned that from the Romans. The Romans used salt as fertilizers, and they ruined the whole breadbasket of the Middle East, Egypt, throughout the Middle East by using salt as its fertilizer. Now you can't grow anything in there. It's very difficult, and that's 2,000 years later. So once salt has broken down, it's no longer good for the microbes. It kills it. Have you ever been hot and sweaty and you put your hand in some fertilizer and you threw it out in the ground? Did it burn you? Chemical burn? Anybody? Yes? Okay, I can show you scars where it did. What do you think it does to the microbial life that is even softer tissue than what we are? It kills it right away. The next scripture is from the Ten Commandments. Moses wrote, do not kill. It does not say in the Hebrew, do not murder. It's not talking about people. It's talking about what God created. You don't kill it. God has created everything for a purpose. And we're going to go into the weeds and the insects and the disease, and I'm going to tell you why it's good in just a minute. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is some of the solutions we created in the United Arab Emirates. Now, the lavender was not in the Emirates. The lavender is in Georgia, okay? But you see the man standing there in the blue shirt. That was my manager of this particular farm, and you notice the tomato plants. Now, he's 188 centimeters tall, so he's a tall man. This was not where the tomatoes stopped growing. They kept growing and growing and growing, and all this was done in the very first year. They produced fruit, lots of cherry tomatoes, as much as the hydroponic yields. Okay, that's unheard of, especially in the first year, because this farm was a commercially driven farm that used synthetic chemicals for over 25 years. This was our first year of conversion. Their tomatoes, as I said, they grew this tall. Now, the interesting thing about the tomato, we put it on the shelf when we harvested. It lasted 5 months. I'm not kidding. 5 months without rotting. It started seeding on the inside, and that's why we couldn't eat it anymore. Now you say, how do you do that? You do that through microbial life. So, the current agricultural system uses methods and practices. They've been using it for decades, and it leads us to death, in my opinion. We have to change the lens from which we're farming. Now, one of the methods that's happening now is farmers are moving to biologicals, but their frame of reference is farming the same way as they did with chemicals. They till the soil the same, they plant the seeds the same, they fertilize the same, except it's organic. You've got to shift beyond that. That's fine for you to do that, but not all organics are the same. They're not the same. You can have a low, organic just means I'm not using chemicals. That's all it means, synthetic chemicals. When you start shifting your mindset to focus on caring for microbial life, not the plant, you're going to start looking at creating different options in your farm. It's going to be small scale and large scale. I'm going to show you pictures of small scale farming today, and the small scale is, how much is 10 acres? Hectares, in hectares, 10 acres? 5, 7. Yeah, there's 2.5 acres out of 1 hectare. So 4 hectares up to around 7 hectares. My farm is around 60 hectares. And so I'm building it slowly. But I'll show you the yields that you can receive. One of the things that you can do when you start shifting to organic farming, one option, import your compost. The problem with importing is you got to pay for it. But you have to also pay attention to the quality of the compost. What are you using it for? Are you using it for trees, perennials, or are you going to be using it for annuals or grasses? The compost that you create is going to be different for each of those 3 categories. A perennial plant needs more fungus as it relates to bacteria. An annual, your vegetables, your flowers, need more bacteria as it relates to fungus. You still need the fungus, or you're going to have nematode issues. So you have to have the fungus. Grasses are pretty equal. Sometimes they can go either side. But you also have to make sure that what you apply to your field is fully composted. People are buying more and more and more compost in the United States, and it's wood chips. It's not compost. When you pick up compost and you have a hand of compost, it should look like dirt, it should smell like dirt, it should feel like dirt. If it doesn't, it's not in compost form. It's still a type of mulch. And when you add that to your soil, it's going to take nitrogen out of your soil to decompose it. Okay, so you don't want to do that. You want to fully compost before you put it into your soil. You want to do a soil analysis, knowing what is in your soil now, what's needed in your soil, so that you can create a balanced soil platform. You want to make sure that your soil, all the different soil, you don't want the same quantity of every mineral. It's in ratios. And again, it depends on what you're growing will determine what the ratios are. And you want to do the compost analysis to see if it actually is going to help. Number 2, you grow your own compost. I went to a farm a couple of days ago, and he has a compost process. He has cattle. He's using cattle manure. He's using sawdust. And he has also, I'm not sure if he's using this or not, but he has a grass that grows very quickly. It's high in protein. I think they probably use it for their cattle. But you can also use that as a form of your carbon crop. And you want to have multiple carbon crops, not just one source of carbon. You want a lot of different sources, has different mineral content in them. All right? So again, grow your own compost. Choose the appropriate method for the compost that you need. If you're growing for an orchard, trees, you want a fungal dominant soil. That means you're going to have more carbon, 40% carbon to, not 40%, 40 times carbon to every 1 nitrogen, okay? And you compost it slower, over and over and over, and I'll explain that in a few minutes why, but you over and over and over until it's to a humus form. Then you apply it. If you're growing vegetables, you want more of a bacterial dominant soil, so your ratio of carbon to nitrogen will be more like a 30-to-1 ratio. And it's very important to understand you start raising your compost or making your compost according to what you're trying to build in the environment that you're building it in. The last part, what types of plants, and again, the amount of time available. When you start doing a high-end compost, it takes longer to compost. I can compost waste in 18 days, but it's a low-grade compost. The compost that we create, some parts of it, I make different components and I mix them together. Some components take 2 years for me to make. So you get that in your cycle, in your farming cycle, and then you start adding as you need it. Here's the new lens that you need to start thinking. The fastest way to build humus is through plant growth, healthy plant growth. It's extremely important. On a large-scale farm, you can't afford compost, by the way. It's just too expensive. So there has to be another method. This is the method that you're going to use when you're working at large-scale farms. For small-scale farms, you can do, I use all three of these. But the importance of doing this process is you have to have good photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is key because you need the exudates, the sugars, going back down into the soil. In photosynthesis, 25% of the sugars go into the roots to form the roots. 25 goes into the frame of the plant to grow the plant. 25% of the sugars go into the fruit. And then 25%, the fruit is to feed us or to reproduce. And the other 25% goes through the roots into the soil to feed the microbes, because the plant cannot act and cannot live without the microbial life unless we fake the process through salts. The types of quality of water application, we'll go through some of that as well. Magnetism and energy. This is something that most people don't look at. It's something you can't hardly find any university level study done on the magnetism and energy, but it's essential. When you look at the creation that God created heavens and earth in the 7-day period, energy was a very, very important part of that creation. So if we're going to create a good garden, we have to use energy. The energies that God created, the magnetic lines or whatever on the earth. I'll show you that in just a minute as well. And then the last part, or the last two, mineralization, which is what I keep hearing everybody talk about here, is taking the rock and mineralizing it and using it. But again, it's not good. It's good, it's very good, but it's not useful unless you have this last part. Cellular, deliverable, nutritional food source. It has to get the microbes eating the minerals, and then when they excrete it in a form that the plant can take up. Without the microbes, you're going to have unhealthy plants. I'm sorry? The bioavailability, very important. So here I'm going to talk about my journey. I began when I had a garbage company when I was young, in my 20s. I grew it. It was a really big company in our region. And then I made some very stupid business decisions, and it started failing. I had 4 children. I'm sorry. Thank you. I had 4 children, and I needed to feed them. My business wasn't doing well. So I said, I'm going to learn how to grow food in a small amount of space. So I started learning, and that was my beginning of my journey in agriculture. After that, I was asked to go to different places in the world, and Thailand was one of those. And then I was teaching. I spent 3 years in the beginning just with a backpack and going into the jungle. And in the jungle, that was where they grew, is in the Golden Triangle. I don't know if you guys know the Golden Triangle. It's where they grew opium. And I worked with the King's Project. And the King's Project was to convert the opium growers into agricultural growers with products that made money. So this was one of the projects that I worked on. No electricity on the top of the mountain. It was surrounded by rainforest. They clear cut it and they grew tapioca. Tapioca in Portuguese. What's that?
Mandioca.
Okay, they grew tapioca. And the tapioca just ruined the land because they grew it time and time and time and time again. So you couldn't grow anything on top of the mountain. No electricity, no water, and horrible soil. So it grew weeds. Everybody knows that when you have terrible soil, you grow weeds. Why? Because a weed's job is to heal your soil. So they had weeds. So we started working, and this became the project that we worked on. This is a tropical region. We had weeds, we had seasonal rain, we had a history of synthetic chemicals, decade of the same crop, low nutrition yields, and no electricity, so we couldn't put a well there to pump water. It was government land, so we couldn't drill a well anyway. So we had to get access to rainwater. Those were our issues. Our solutions: we created a deep bed preparation, intensive planting. The deep bed is double dug, typically 80 centimeters down. We went 100 centimeters because we wanted to make sure we had water and that it held the water. Intensive planting, that's the French intensive method. So if you take notes, guys in the back, French intensive method is very important. Thermal compost and vermicompost. We started raising worms because the soil was so bad. And we started growing and harvesting our weeds to create the compost because we didn't have the money to import it. And we used permaculture designs. That's another thing that you guys in the back want to study is permaculture design. Very effective in many different areas. And you can see most of the workers were ladies. They hated me the first year, because they did not want to dig that deep. It was hard work, very, very hard work. We couldn't take a tractor up there. The government wouldn't let us, so we dug by hand. They got the boulders and they picked them out, and this is what we did. This is 1 year later on the bottom. You don't see weeds in there either during that time. And the soil got better and better and better year after year. I would go every 2 to 3 months and visit them for about 3 days and teach them a little bit new each time. Now this takes us to the United Arab Emirates. I started working at the school. I worked with the men's college for a while, and then I worked at the women's college. And so again, we can use this style of farming in the desert regions as well. There we go. Now I want to show you something here. These are our issues. In the desert, we had 1% organic material. That's very important. Organic material is one of the things that you want to constantly monitor. Our water, 70 millimeters per year. Temperature, up to 55 degrees Celsius in the summertime with a wind that blew, hard winds that blew. So you couldn't grow during that summertime, and that was one of our objectives. How can we grow in the summertime? Strong winds, insects and disease, unreal. The big caterpillars that you see that they talk about in the Bible, the locust, is like helicopters. It was awful. They would come in and eat everything up at one time. And then the cation exchange capacity was at 3. That's another key indicator that you always want to look for. What's your CEC rate? It should be, to grow organically, it needs to be around the 30 range. Remember that. You should have a CEC rate around 30. If you don't, you need to be working towards getting your cation exchange capacity higher. We had low yields. Now, I'm sorry?
Só ajudando vocês, esse CEC é a capacidade de troca catiônica, CTC. A tradução talvez não tenha sido tão... Desculpe interromper.
I wanted to show you this one photo. This was one of my employees from the Cameroon. He was my height, so he was around 186 centimeters tall. The sheikh gave us seeds. Actually, he had us collect the seeds of a tree that we would be planting to reforest the mountains, the desert mountains. And we were planting around 250,000 at that time per year. So we collected seeds. He gave us he wanted half the seeds. We kept the other half. He didn't tell us what he was using it for. He had his gardener plant the seeds in their compost. We planted our seeds in 5% mixture of regular sand and 5% of our compost, which was microbially strong. This, if you notice, this little stick right here, up to about right here, it's just this little twig with leaves on either side. That was the 100-day mark for the sheikh's seeds. We planted on the exact same 3 days in our thing. The tree to the right with the limbs and stuff, that's 100 days. Both same seeds. The difference is the type of microbial life that we used. Now, when they transplanted these seeds in our project, the majority of their plants died. We only had, out of 1,500 trees of the area that I looked at, we had 3 trees die. This is in a desert. Microbial life's the key. Oh, all the way on the end, you saw the deal. Let me go back. You see the deal on the side? When in the store, you could take the deal that you're buying and you could break it and do this and put it up to your nose and you could barely smell it. The garden, we had one bed. You could be 4 or 5 meters away and smell it in the field. The oils that it was producing, the lipids that it was producing were high concentration of lipids. All right, we've already showed you this. The solution was to add compost with a high concentration of microbial life. Food forest, we created a forest with 7 canopies around the area, and as the wind blew, it cooled the air. And we built a shade cloth above it, so as it went through the trees, it cooled the air, and then you had cool air we could grow year-round. It also helped with less evaporation, because you had the transpiration on the outside. Desalinization, irrigation, and we used biointensive farming, and we had a PhD from Brazil who did our bees. One of the best bee people I've ever met in my life. Excellent, excellent person. This was the layout of the farm. We'll go one more. This is a layout of a block. Basically, we have 36 beds in each block. Each bed was 10 square meters. And the reason I did that is all my data for the last 30 some odd years has been built on 10 square meters. So I can compare it to know if I have a problem or not based upon that information. Let's see, I need to hurry. This is our shade block. This is in the desert. We're about a quarter of a kilometer from the ocean. So we're getting the salty water coming in and seeping up underneath our farm. We built the shade cloth. We dug the beds 1 meter deep. We mixed the compost. Here in the field, we mixed it at 20% compost. We wanted to get our organic material up above 5%, in some cases 8%, depending on the crop that we're doing. Then we put the blocks around it, and you can see how they were working, and they filled the block in. The next part is after they filled it in, we planted. So we made a sheet that had the measurements of the beans. And they would take lime dust, put it on there. They would lift the sheet up, which you can see here. You've got dots. That's where they planted the seed. So the reason I did that is I knew that we could get 621 seeds per block on a 6-inch square or 6-inch triangular structure. I would give them 621 seeds. they would come back with a handful of seeds. They weren't planting it in the right place. Well, every time they didn't plant a seed, that means I have less production. It was very important to get my maximum number of plants in the bed. So this is how we did it. Then we did the irrigation. And then we started planting and growing. Now, also in a dry setting, you use mulch to keep the evaporation. If you got water issues, you want to use many different tools. We went from 10 gallons, I don't know how many liters that is, but 10 gallons a day per bed. By the time we finished, we were at 1.7 gallons per day per bed. That's an 82% drop in water usage by using different techniques. This is a system where we taught, every time you see a square, that was a different lesson that we taught our employees. So, the solution, focus on the soil. This is our goose. Increasing our aeration is very important. Proper watering techniques. Most people think you water it and then you come back 3 days later and you water it again. No, you water every single day a small amount. And the gravity will take it down, and then you water a small amount the next day. That's one of the primary ways that we drop the water usage. We increase the organic material. We increase the microbial activity. Not just that microbial life, the activity, the reproduction. The reproduction is extremely important. And we increased the structural capacity. Our soil became, when you got it in the beginning, it was sand. It would go right through your fingers. Over the next 2 years, you got it, and it would stay in your hands. So you're always working on the structural integrity of that soil. So now, we increased our production in certain crops over 1,200%, 12 times. Decreased our water in one area, 88%. Increased the health benefits, no synthetic chemicals. So here's just a few things we'll go through quickly. This is a 3-month time frame on 0.34 hectare. These are in kilos. These are our products that we harvested in the quantities. This is about 10 times more than they produced normally. I'll go through some of these. This is the U.S. average. These three are biointensive methods. This is our yields, biointensive. So when you're learning biointensive in the beginning, your soil quality is very poor. This is what you should expect. This is over 40 some odd years of data saying this is what you should expect. When you become intensive, for our intermediate farmers in that field, in that style, you will retain this or do this. And this is advanced. This is what we did the very first year. It normally takes 3 to 5 years to go between the basic, intermediate, to advanced. Every grouping is about 3 to 5 years. We are doing it quicker by using some of the systems that I was talking about. Now this is compared to hydroponic. The orange is a hydroponic. If you notice, the purple and the orange are very close, except with rocket salad. I'm not sure what you call rocket salad, but it's a type of salad. And it was low, but we were still 6 times greater than the U.S. average. The red line is our water usage. Typically it goes down each year because you get more and more organic material and humus in the soil. The amount of amendments that you add to build your soil decreases over time, and your outputs of production increase. This is Ecology Action. The guy's name is John Jevons. He's a good friend of mine. He's the guru of biointensive farming, and these are his results. My results are a little bit better, but I'm doing things a little differently than he is. All right, so this is something interesting. For every 1% of water that you have, 1% of organic material that you have in your soil, you can retain 22,000 gallons in that 1 acre. You want to convert that to the rainwater? About the percentage of organic material?
Então, para cada 1% de matéria orgânica, você consegue colocar 22 mil galões. 22 mil galões equivaleria a uma chuva de 20 milímetros. Fica retido no solo. Ou seja, são 200 metros cúbicos por hectare. Só para dar uma noção da retenção dessa matéria orgânica no solo. Então, com 3%, dá 66 mil galões, isso seriam 617 mil litros de água por hectare, ou uma lâmina d'água de 61 milímetros.
The importance of organic material in your soil in a dry climate is extreme. It's needed for everything. It's the food source for your microbial life. But from a water retention perspective, if you're in a dry climate and you're expecting, or even you guys get good water, you're getting 40 inches of rain every year. The problem is you get it all at one time or 2 times in the year. So most of it runs off. You're not retaining that water. If you can get the organic material in the soil, you can build it, you're going to retain more water in the soil. You don't have to irrigate as much. When you move up, this is considered good quality soil when you have about 5% organic material in the soil. So when you move from 3% to 5%, now we're looking at 110,000 gallons of water retained in your soil. And my goal was to get 8%. That's my goal. I've found that 8% works really, really, really well in vegetable production. Now, the thing that's interesting about this number, the amount of nitrogen that you can retain. For every 1% organic material, you will retain 7.39 pounds of readily available nitrogen to the plant. One of the speakers earlier today said, the stuff's already in the soil. He's absolutely correct if you don't have your erosion taking the topsoil away. But if you've got some topsoil, you're going to have large quantities of nitrogen in your soil. Now, if you put your wood chips in there and then you start decompose it, that nitrogen will work to decompose the wood chips. So you need to have it fully composted before you add it. And then you're going to be able to use this nitrogen into the plant framing. All right, magnetism and cycles. I'm going to go really quick through this. This is something you need to study on your own. There are Hartman lines and Curry lines. That's one. There are ley lines. There are many different types of magnetic energy lines that cross the earth. And there's also energy in the atmosphere. When you're dowsing for your well and it pulls the stick down, that is pulling towards a magnetic pull, and typically where these cross, that is typically where you're going to have a water source because it's cracks in the rock. So it will, the stick or the wires will cross from a magnetic pull. It's not a religious thing. It's magnetics. So the Hartman and Curry lines are very important. I use this in my agriculture. Some plants and microbes love negative energy. Some like positive energy, and some like neutral energy. These lines are either positive or negative, or when they cross, they create a neutral energy point. We found that our mango trees love negative energy. They would flourish. We would have many kilos of crop when it was on a negative energy line. When you put it on a positive energy line, it died. 3-4 years later, it had disease and it would die. Same thing for citrus. Citrus likes positive energy. So do the microbes that work well with the citrus trees. So this is something that I'm just going to throw out, something that you should think about and start looking into. We're not going to cover a lot of that. Moon cycles. When do you plant? There's a lot of data that says when you plant according to certain types of moon cycles that you have more production than at other times. I've seen some data that says it works. I've seen others where they said it didn't work, but I have had more say it does work than not. I've never used the moon cycle system, but it's something you should at least experiment with. Cycles. These are all different types of cycles. You have the hydraulic cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the oxygen cycle, carbon cycles. You have to understand the cycles in relation to the microbial life. If you start focusing again on the microbial life, you'll see these charts, you'll see them in a different way. And they're very useful, very, very useful. Compost. Waste equals food. So when you trim your trees, when you're pulling your weeds, that's gold. It's gold. You put it in your compost pile. Compost is gold. It's the home for the microbial life. It's what keeps them replicating. Compost teas. Very important to start looking at making compost teas. You create a compost pile. You take different pieces of the compost pile. You brew the microbial life. You brew it in water. And if you're going to have more of a bacterial, you put different food in, sugars, molasses. If you're going to use for fungal, you put things like humic acid or seaweed, things that are going to feed the fungus. And then you spray that application on your field. That's how you stimulate your microbial life. And then you start observing. Make sure you start observing life. We'll go through this. Next one. Did we do this? No, we didn't do it in Spanish or Portuguese. Compost teas you use to inoculate your beneficial microbes. Fungi and bacteria have different purposes and different ways that you do this. The fungus likes aged brown organic material. Bacteria likes green, fresh material. Mulch laid on the surface tends to support fungi. Mulch worked into the soil supports bacterial colonization. Coarse, drier mulches support fungus. Wet and grind the mulch thoroughly, it speeds up bacteria. Kelp, humic acid, folic acid, phosphorus, rock, dust help fungus grow. Sugars help bacteria multiply and grow. Here's just a few things I've seen in my garden that you should be thinking through. Compost teas are very sensitive to chlorine and fluoride. So if you have fluorine or chloride in your water source, you have to filter that out through aeration or filtration before you start working with the microbial life. It will kill it. There's no reason to go through all the work if the microbes are going to be dead when you spray them. So applications of synthetic chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, that kills most of your soil food web biology. Stay away from the additives of high NPK. You don't need high quantities of nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium. You need small quantities that just needs to be readily available for the plant to take up. After any chemical spraying, if you do chemical spraying, you need to do a compost tea application. So you have to put the microbes back in, but wait a few days before you do that. Then rototilling and excess disturbance destroys the soil food web, primarily the fungus. And fungus is very, very important in the creation of humus or humic acid. All right, let's talk about this real quick. You guys need to stand up and take a break. I don't know if you're falling asleep. You're okay? All right, we're okay. There's a symbiotic relationship between the plant and the soil biology. They can't live without each other. Plants need minerals, but plants cannot create minerals. They cannot take up minerals without the microbes. Microbes need sugar. but microbes can't create their own sugar. So as a plant needs nitrogen, it will create, through the photosynthesis, it will create a specific type of exudate, sugar, carbohydrate. It will send it down into the soil, and the microbes that hold the nitrogen will then eat that sugar, and they will excrete nitrogen, and the plant will take up the nitrogen. When the plant needs phosphorus, it will put out a different exudate, and that exudate will then in turn draw the microbes that hold the phosphorus. So in other words, you don't have to manipulate the plant to produce. The plant knows what it wants to eat. It will send the sugars when it wants it. And when it's finished doing its job, it'll send a different type of exudate for budding or for fruiting or for whatever else that it needs at the time. Our job is simple. Care for the soil. Use the plant as to understand what's going on. So again, the microbes need the carbohydrates. The plant sends it into the earth, it eats it, it excretes the enzyme, and the plants then take up that mineral source. Different plants types support different microbial types. Now this part is new science. They're starting to find specific types of biology that work with different types of plants. This is something new. So typically what I do, because this is not my field, when I'm putting microbial life into my zone, I get as much different, I want a diversified microbial platform or portfolio, and I'm going to put it all in there because I don't know what that plant needs and what it doesn't. Now there are a lot of scientists that are starting to learn that, and because of that, we need to continue in that field. But don't think that we will ever understand more than God. And when we start, 100 years ago, they said, all we need is NPK. That's all we need. And we were sold on that. And that's what we did for 50 years, NPK, NPK, NPK. Then they found the micro minerals. Okay, you need some copper. You need some iron. So now they had 5 added more into our mix. But it's much more than that. It's the whole spectrum in the right ratio. A plant knows itself. It'll eat what it needs. Most annuals, vegetables, grasses prefer nitrogen in the nitrate form. This is important as well. They need it in the nitrate form, and they do best in bacterial-dominant soils. Most perennials, trees, shrubs, prefer nitrogen in the ammonium form. Does best with fungal-dominant soils. This is the plant health pyramid. This is something very important. The author of this particular methodology is John Kempf. He's out of Ohio. He's an Amish young man in his 30s. He has an 8th grade education, but his practical application, he probably has 3 or 4 PhDs. He is brilliant. But he came up with this process, and it's very, very informative. In the very beginning, when you're building your soil, you focus on complete photosynthesis. After you do the complete photosynthesis, then it changes, the carbohydrates change to protein, and then you're looking at the complete change of carbohydrate to protein. Now, these first two deal with the chemical process. Let's go to the first one. Basically, if you're wanting to take care of, if you're having aphid problems or whitefly problems, the problem is not that the insect is eating your plant. The problem is you don't have full photosynthesis. If you have full photosynthesis, the digestive aspect of that insect cannot eat. It will die when it eats the foods at this level. In addition to that, to get full photosynthesis, we need magnesium, iron, manganese, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Okay? That's what you need to make sure that you're getting full photosynthesis. The second aspect is complete protein synthesis. There's 4 more sulfur, I can't even read it. Can't read it. Hold on a minute. Manganese, sulfur, boron, and molybdenum. Those 4 elements will help you obtain full protein synthesis. Yes?
Só repassando os minerais são enxofre, magnésio, molibdênio e boro.
Now, the types of, when you have full protein synthesis, the types of bugs that will not start coming to eat your plant are things like larvae or sucking insects, such as tomato hornworm, cabbage looper, corn borers, corn earworms, aphids, leaf hoppers, whiteflies, and thrips. When you have full photosynthesis and then you have full protein synthesis, you will not have issues with these types of insects. Now this part here, the first 2, deals with chemicals. It deals with your rocks, basically, what everyone's wanting to deal with here. The 3rd and the 4th level deals with biological. That's why hydroponics will never produce a crop that will be fully insect resistant, because it is not biological. It's strictly a chemical process. So when we're looking at the 3rd level, we're increasing our lipid synthesis. That's the fats. So the plant is becoming more and more healthy, and because it's becoming more and more healthy, it's doing that through the microbial reproduction. All right? And then the next level that we have is the increased plant secondary metabolite synthesis. Now in this particular one, now we're getting into beetles, potato beetles, cucumber beetles. There's all types of beetle forms. When you get lipid content at its highest level, it's like essential oils. It heals, okay? It protects from viruses. It protects from certain insects, all right? The same thing that we do. Now, I want to bring up one point. I said something about weeds and insects and disease, and I said they're good. And everybody kind of looked at me really strangely. Why do you think God created that? Why? It's a simple answer. I want to be healthy. The weed's job, and we'll get into that in a minute, but the weed's job is to tell me what's missing in the soil. And it heals the soil. The insect's job is like a garbage collector. It eats sick plants. And the disease is even more drastic. It eats really sick plants. Now, what I'm doing when I use an insecticide or a fungicide or any of the sides, what you're doing is saying, God, I know more than you. I want to eat that product. So I'm going to spray and kill the insects so that I can eat that sick plant. Now, when I eat that sick plant, it makes me sick. Our focus is on killing. Our focus is on the wrong focus, is on making that plant grow. The focus needs to be on making the plant healthy enough to fight away the disease. Because if it can fight away its disease, when we eat it, then we can fight away the disease that's trying to attack us as well. Shift your focus to healthy plants, not to making the plant produce. The plant's job is to produce. It's going to produce. Our job is to make it healthy, and it produces more. All right, so there's active immunity and passive immunity. In the first 2 levels, we have passive immunity. It's the shifting of the plant's own nutritional profile. And that profile no longer is a food source for the insects. Okay, so the food's not there. The insect's not going to come to eat because there's no food there. The second part is the upper 2. Now, this passive immunity is down here. It's chemically driven. The upper two is active immunity, and that's where the plant's immune pathways are triggered by microbial soil activity, not only in the soil, but in the air. It's just as important that you take care of the microbial life in the air as in the soil, but the soil has a different job than the air microbes. This didn't work right. It's changing my slide. Anyway, okay. They're going to fix that in a minute. The next thing I want to talk to you about, you can't see it yet, but it's called the critical points of influence. When a plant is growing, when it's in the seed form, it has all the DNA and structure that it needs to be the best that it can be. Its environment takes away from it becoming the best that it can be. Same as you, same as we're born with all this capacity, but as we go through life, it hits at us and nicks at us and takes the capacity away. The same with a plant. So there's 10 points of influence, or critical time frames, when the plant needs specific minerals for it to, or biology, for it to become the most productive that it can be. And if you miss any of these time frames, there's a small window. If you miss these time frames, what happens is you now knock away at the potential. For an example, corn plants can produce 7 ears of corn, and they can grow up to 21 feet tall because my friend did it. I watched him do it. 7 meters corn, 7 ears of corn per plant. I have never been able to grow more than 3.5 ears of corn per stalk. My corn gets up around 4.5 meter, 5 meter, but I've never been able to do what he's done. So what I'm learning is, at a specific time, I have to do a sap analysis to tell what is missing in that plant at the time that it needs it. So one part would be the germination stage. You want to put different, you want to make sure that plant has what it needs in the germination stage. Bud initiation, framing. When the plant is growing, it needs more nitrogen. It's framing itself. When it goes to bud out the flower, it needs it's a hormonal change during that time. It needs specific things for it to make the best bud. So there's 10 different elements there. There we go. 10 different time frames. The fruiting stage, the cell division stage, the seed maturity stage. All of these are specific points of time that we do a sap analysis. Now, most people do sap analysis only on one leaf. No, you do the sap analysis on the old leaf and the newest young leaf, because a plant's job is to reproduce and to keep the new growth growing and be healthy. So you take the old leaf, you do sap analysis. You take the new leaf, you do sap analysis. When you compare it, if there's a lack of a mineral in the old leaf, but it's present in the new leaf, the old leaf gave that to the new leaf because it didn't have it in the soil. Didn't have enough. So it's dying so that the young can live. That's the way you do soil or sap analysis. That is how you would come and figure out what's needed at each one of these stages of the plant's development. I don't know how much time I have left. That's going the wrong way. All right, cation exchange, very, very important as well. Low cation exchange it's the catalyst, it's the electronic aspect that's the catalyst that takes the nutrient up into the plant. So you want to make sure that you have a CEC rate in the 30s if possible. I'll hurry. This is the Food Soil Web. Write down the name Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's the one that created the soil food web. She has a database that goes with it. It's extremely, extremely helpful. Her classes are fairly inexpensive that you can take online as well. Another name you should mention or should write down is Dr. Mary Cole out of Melbourne, Australia. She's the best when it comes to fungus, best in the world. Elaine is the best as the whole, but her specialty is bacteria. Go through this real quick. All right, now this is something important for you. Pay attention. When the organic material falls, you have fungus that begins to eat it. It becomes broken down, and then you have bacterial digestion. When the bacteria eats it, it gets it into another form where the fungus can then start eating. This becomes a loop. The fungus keeps eating the organic material over and over, and it digests it over and over and over until it reaches a saturation of around 40%, 38 to 42%. When it's at that percentage, it is now in a stable humus form. The half-life on the humus is every 100 years, it loses half of its life. So the humus is key. But humus doesn't take place without it's not up there anymore, without the relationship between the bacteria and the fungus. It's very important that you learn how to utilize this process in your farm. These are different types of fungus, different types of biology. We'll just kind of row through it real quick. The top right is bacteria. The top bottom is fungus, protozoa, nematodes. Always remember, not all nematodes are bad. In fact, the majority of nematodes are good nematodes. If you kill all your nematodes because you have a predatory nematode, you kill them all, what happens is the good nematodes reproduce slowly. The bad nematodes reproduce very quickly. So you'll have to keep spraying every time to kill the bad nematodes, and it's a vicious cycle that goes down. Let's go through. Oh, another thing that you'll hear, people tell you to get the mycorrhizal fungi when you're buying compost. Have y'all heard that? Mycorrhizal fungi. They put it in compost now. It's just a sales ploy. Mycorrhizal fungi only lives in a root zone that's alive. So if you put it in a bag in a compost form, it's dead. So it's not helping you at all. But you do need mycorrhizal fungi, but it needs to be in your field. Let's go back one. Let me do this. All right, about erosion. I want to cover just a couple of things I said I was going to cover, and I'm going to run quick. Erosion. Erosion happens when you don't have the microbial life. Bacteria is in 5 different shapes. The outside of the bacteria is a wax. A glue. A glue. That glue holds together, it bonds soil together. It's not necessarily the roots that bond soil together, it's the microbial life around that ribosphere that is bonding the soil together. Fungus, like this, is a tip of a hypha. The tip of the hypha, as it grows, puts out a wax. That also bonds the soil together. The more biology you have in your soil, the more rain you can have, and it's not going to erode your soil until it gets saturated to a certain point. It's essential to focus on the soil. Air is important. Basically, air, you have about 50% air, 50% air and water, and it depends on whether you're in a rainy season or not, but that ratio it just changes back and forth. On your watering process, if you water a little bit every day, gravity will take the water down. You'll have an air pocket. You water again, another water layer. It will drive. Gravity will take it down. It pushes the air into the soil. So it's a part of your aeration process. I'm sorry to have to go so quick. I know y'all tired too. So. Irrigation, water. Water can be stored in soil or in tanks. Soil is your best. When you're transporting it, these are things that we're working on in the lab. We're trying to see how these things affect the growth of our plants. In nature, water goes through a vortex over rocks. It turns a certain way, and that creates structure in the water. You want to purify your water. Again, you want to treat that water the same as you would your golden goose. Give it pure water. You can use filters, and you can use biology as well as a part of that. Oxygenation, when you have lightning storms, you get ozone. Ozone is a form of oxygen. One of the O3, one of the oxygen tears off, and you got O2 and an O. Basically, ozone is very, very important. If you notice, when you water with a hose, you get a little bit of growth. You have one rain one night with a lightning storm, and you get exponential growth the next day. That's because oxygenation, energy, many things in there are helping the microbial life reproduce very quickly, and this fed and the plant grows in response to that. Structured water through magnetized and magnets and grid lines, something you need to look into. And energized using frequency machines as well. That's something that you want to experiment with. Something the university should be looking into, because it's essential. This is just basic the water cycle. You guys know that. This is one of the ways that you can create and store your water. If you're on a hill, you create a ditch, okay, to hold the water, but it's on contour. You don't want it at an angle. You want it level, because you want to spread the water out and hold it on your property as long as possible. Because as you do that, the water then starts to recharge your aquifer, your first aquifer. And if you do have the ditch, start filling it full of mulch, because that helps hold the water longer, which helps the microbial life. This is just another picture of the same thing. Oxygenation, as I said, is very important. If you look at hydroponics, if you look at creating brews for reproduction of microbial life, oxygenation is extremely important to that. So you need oxygen in the soil. So I add it to my water before I do my irrigation. Structured water, there's a lot of studies on it. They're studying it more and more and more. On the right-hand side up top, that's unstructured water that they just took. They froze it and they took a picture. When it ran it through a titanium plate, that's one way they can do it. Others is energetic, and then they froze it, and then they took a picture of it. Then you have actual structures within the water. When you have structured waters, it pushes away the contaminants. This is just, again, energized water. The plants that are big in the middle, those were using energetic magnets and things like that to create more production. Let's do. This is another way that we created the microclimate. I want to go through this. You kind of know how to do it around a field. This is it's in the Middle East. The top two pictures is on the farm that we had. Hold on a second. All right, this is one I want to show you. When you're planting, the method that I use is called intensive, French intensive. This is the amount of space using traditional farming, rows. This is a biointensive methodology where it's a wide bed, close intensive planting. This is 25% of the space is that, and it's the same number of plants. Now there's an advantage of having that. If you want to control weeds, you want the plants to be closely planted together, and then when they grow, they create a canopy, and the light does not get in and germinate your weed seed. It also creates a microclimate for the CO2. It also creates a cooling effect for the microbial life, the soil, in the heat of the summer. So your production continues because you're controlling your temperature of your soil. Typically, people grow their food or grow crops, they'll till down maximum a foot, and that's this. Tomato plants can grow as deep, the roots can grow as deep as 2 meters down. So we dug our land, we dug it 1 meter, we amended it in that manner, and we got very large structure of roots. This is a friend of mine. We were growing using the compost and slate that we were using. This is grass. There's no fertilizer used at all, and you look at the root structure there. If you're looking to build your carbon in your soil, that's one way to do it. Build large quantities of root mass, because when you harvest the crop, the roots are going to die, the microbes are going to decompose it, and over time it will become humus. Observation. Plant deficiencies, you can tell what's missing in a plant, magnesium, calcium, whatever, by different things that you see on the plant. Critical points of influence we talked about. Insects, good or bad? You guys have to decide. I've gone with the insects are good concept. And since then, my focus is on my plants having a problem, my soil's having a problem, how do I fix the soil? And that has worked for me. Insects are the garbage collector of the earth. Disease is the demolition crew. And the moral of the stories, of all these stories, is take care of your goose, and the goose will take care of you. So from that point, we ask if you have questions, and be glad to entertain any if you have any. Got it?
Agradecemos a participação do senhor Richard Scoy. Também agradecemos aqui a presença e o apoio do senhor Federico Falandi, que trabalha já há alguns anos junto ao senhor Richard em projetos globais de agricultura. Neste momento, convidamos ao palco o presidente do PGT, Eugênio Farias, para um pronunciamento.
Boa tarde. Eu só queria agradecer aos alunos que vieram, pessoal da IFB, pessoal da Secretaria de Agricultura que está aqui, pessoal do GAS, agradecer ao Rogério e sua equipe, que no calor da emoção, na última hora, resolveu ajudar no papel da Dani aqui. Agradecer a minha equipe, agradecer ao Alexandre Traboldi, que viabilizou a vinda desse professor, mestre. Thank you so much, teacher. A pergunta que se faz é, por que não, né? Tudo é possível. Tudo é possível se fazer. Se você acredita, coloca coração, gestão e seriedade, as coisas acontecem. Esse parque nunca mais vai voltar a ser o mesmo, eu tenho certeza disso. Cada ano melhor, cada ano com pessoas mais interessantes, trazendo novas tecnologias, trazendo novas informações. É só mais um. A gente começa logo daqui a pouco com um outro evento internacional do gás aqui, que também é muito interessante, que fala de agricultura sustentável, que fala de voltar às origens com tecnologia. Eu fico muito orgulhoso de fazer parte disso, humildemente, até porque não sou do agro. A única plantação que eu tenho é um potinho de banana que a Campo me deu. Gente, muito obrigado. Aproveitem o evento. Ainda tem mais uma semana aí. Vamos para frente. Obrigado.
Neste momento, o senhor Eugênio faz a entrega do certificado de participação e uma lembrança ao nosso palestrante. Uma lembrança também ao senhor Federico Falandi. A realização da Expoabra 2022 é da PGT, Parque Granja do Torto, da Top 7 e do Sistema FAP-Senar. Os realizadores deste grande evento agradecem os parceiros SEASA, Emater, SEAGRE e também aos apoiadores SEBRAE, SESCOP, CNA, Banco do Brasil, Ministério da Economia. Agradecemos também a presença de cada um de vocês que se encontram aqui, todos que se encontram aqui neste auditório, e também a participação, a presença de quem está acompanhando a transmissão pelos canais digitais da Expoabra. Informamos que a programação neste auditório, ela retorna amanhã a partir das 9 horas. Até lá!
O que nos alimenta, nos une. O abraço alimenta o afeto. A conscientização alimenta a cidadania. O conhecimento alimenta a educação. A economia alimenta o otimismo. O produtor alimenta o futuro. A tecnologia alimenta a sustentabilidade. O investimento alimenta a ciência.
Alimentar é construir o futuro.
Somos o sistema CNA, Senar.
O Parque Granja do Torto nasceu e cresceu com Brasília. Criada para abastecer de alimentos a capital do Brasil e hospedar alguns de seus moradores mais ilustres, a granja conquistou seu espaço na memória afetiva dos brasilienses como o cantinho rural da capital e palco de grandes eventos e festas. Desde então, Brasília evoluiu e a granja também. O Parque Granja do Torto será a nova residência oficial do agronegócio em Brasília. Um polo de inovação, negócios e lazer no coração da capital e de uma das regiões de maior potencial agroeconômico do Brasil. Com espaço para empresas focadas na Agricultura 4.0 e na terceira onda de inovação tecnológica no campo brasileiro, a Cidade Agro vai ser uma incubadora e aceleradora de biotechs e agtechs e a grande vitrine tecnológica do agronegócio. São milhões de reais de investimento privado em novas tecnologias sustentáveis, como conectividade no campo, agricultura de precisão e bioinsumos. Produtos biotecnológicos surgindo como alternativa verde aos agrotóxicos e fertilizantes químicos. O PGT também vai ser um grande centro de conhecimento e aprendizado. além da Faculdade CNA, da Confederação Nacional do Agronegócio, e de 4 unidades de formação profissional e ensino técnico do Senar, Serviço Nacional de Aprendizado Rural. A granja também terá um hospital veterinário, o único para animais de grande porte do DF, que vai formar alunos de 9 faculdades de veterinária locais e consolidar Brasília como capital do cavalo e um dos principais polos criadores de equinos do país. Essas novidades serão integradas num plano urbanístico moderno pelo Shopping Center Agro, nova opção de lazer para os moradores do Distrito Federal, com serviços e entretenimento para toda a família. Um espaço aberto e seguro, que alia o cenário rural com as melhores amenidades urbanas como restaurantes, lojas e espaços para eventos, encontros setoriais, leilões, feiras e muito mais. Além de todas essas novidades, a granja vai continuar a hospedar serviços sociais gratuitos e filantrópicos, como os Cavaleiros Solidários da Ande Ecoterapia e a Comunidade Terapêutica da Fazenda Esperança. E grandes eventos como a Expo Abra, que acontece todo setembro e já tem espaço cativo no calendário do DF. E é só o começo, porque a granja vai continuar crescendo para ajudar Brasília a se firmar como um dos principais polos de negócios e inovação do campo brasileiro. Parque Granja do Torto, a residência oficial do agronegócio na capital do Brasil.